So, today on the podcast, we're going to talk about a couple of Disney World restaurants that have made some rather poor business decisions. And we'll also talk about why these decisions were problematic. To put this directly, we'll talk about how the Disney World model works and what does and does not succeed in that environment. The first half of our episode today looks at an interesting experiment that didn't really work out. And the second half looks at something that I would describe more as an opening fiasco, a project with a long line of specific missteps. And here's the other thing. Both of these restaurants occupied the same location, first one and now the other. My general education microeconomics professor from many decades ago would probably fail me for saying this, but maybe there's something here that at least feels like this might be a cursed location, a building that seems to pull in flawed plans. And these two restaurants, and also a discussion of the Disney World model, are at the center of our episode today. Today's story is mostly about how the Disney company grows and changes. In my view, there are two main historical phases to the Disney company. There's the original phase, in which the company followed ideas established by Walt and Roy, in which most films, TV shows, and projects were started in-house and overseen by Disney executives and lead artists. During this period, Disney acted like a traditional company in which a small group of managers oversaw nearly all aspects of production. Let's say that this phase of the company starts with its founding in 1923 and ends in 1984 when Walt Disney's son-in-law, Ron Miller, steps down as CEO. He was the last person to run the company who had spent a good deal of time with its founders. And let's say that the modern Disney company also begins in 1984 when Michael Eisner was named CEO, a person who had previously been president of Paramount and had no deep connection to the Disney family. With Michael Eisner and later Bob Iger, Disney acted as a corporation or even a conglomerate, in which either through purchases, controlling stakes, or long-term contracts, Disney worked with outside companies or purchased business units that hadn't been developed in-house. That is, the company expanded by acquiring other properties. In this model, Disney works with or purchases non-Disney companies in such a way that when the outside company is put into the Disney system, both the Disney company and the outside company have more value. Pixar as a movie studio had the ability to create films which were, through a partner, distributed to theaters. Pixar could have also arranged licensing agreements for consumer products, but beyond this, Pixar didn't have a lot of reach into other business markets. But by partnering with and later being purchased by Disney, the Pixar characters and stories suddenly had value in new business areas. Disney could use the Pixar characters in the theme parks. They could create rides around Pixar films. They could include new Pixar content in its streaming service and in years past on home video. Disney likely had greater reach with its consumer products than did Pixar on its own. Disney could put Pixar characters into restaurants, hotels, and a growing fleet of cruise ships. You can quickly see how all this works. Over time, Disney had put together a set of businesses that were closely arranged to pull the largest value from successful TV and film projects by leveraging screen characters and narrative materials beyond the world of theater and TV. In business terms, this is a type of related diversification in which Disney has assembled a set of business areas arranged to produce additional value from popular characters who initially appeared on screen. This meant the Pixar characters had new ways to create additional revenue. In return, these characters from outside companies such as Pixar also brought more value to existing Disney business units. Just think about how many streaming customers Disney would now lose if it didn't have Pixar, the Star Wars characters, the Marvel characters, and so on. Likewise, how many fewer theme park customers would Disney have if it didn't offer Galaxy's Edge, Cosmic Rewind, Toy Story Land, Avengers Campus, various Buzz Lightyear rides, Remy's Ratatouille Adventure, Toy Story Mania, the Indiana Jones Stunt Spectacular, and so on? Or to put this question in a slightly different form, how much more can Disney now charge for admission to its parks because it has Galaxy's Edge, Cosmic Rewind, Toy Story Land, and all those other things? Simply by Disney partnering with or purchasing outside companies, these outside companies now make more money, as do existing Disney business units such as the theme parks. The arrangement of these business areas has taken Disney years to develop and really perfect. But with these business units now in place, under the larger corporate umbrella, Disney now has the ability to pull additional value out of characters and stories made for film. Additional value that outside companies, such as the original Pixar, didn't have access to on their own. Also, because these Disney business units are all under one corporate structure, at least ideally, the cost to run them is lower than if the companies were each on their own, which then gives Disney a financial advantage over independent companies not tied to a corporate structure. Beyond Disney, there's no other entertainment company that has integrated such businesses into a single corporation with this level of success. A distant second would be NBC Universal, with their films, themed resorts, TV network, and Peacock streaming service, with 2 new mini parks opening soon in the US and with Epic Universe opening in Orlando. Universal is beginning to catch up, but it's not there yet. And here's the thing. This Disney model of integrating material initiated at outside companies only works with certain types of media offerings. And this became very clear in the 1990s and early 2000s with one particular Disney-backed restaurant. Michael Eisner, a deep sports fan, was interested in moving Disney from a family film entertainment company to also a sports entertainment company. Not only did he greenlight a lot of sports-related family films, both for the big screen and for the Disney Channel, he also purchased 2 actual sports teams for the company, the Mighty Ducks, later called the Anaheim Ducks, and the Anaheim Angels. Beyond this, he had the idea that sports entertainment could be grown and developed with the same strategies as the company had done very successfully with animation and live-action films. In 1996, when Disney bought Capital Cities ABC, which was overall a very useful acquisition because it allowed Disney to move into network TV, it picked up, almost as a byproduct, ESPN, which Capital Cities had owned for about 10 years. ESPN had very little in common with core Disney businesses, but instead of spinning off ESPN, Eisner tried to integrate the property into other Disney business units, much the same way he had worked with the Pixar characters. Somewhat in the fashion of the Disney stores or the short-lived Disney Quest projects, Eisner planned to open a set of ESPN restaurants, originally called the ESPN Grill, and later renamed the ESPN Zone, which would focus on sports-themed dining experiences, not significantly different than how Disney had integrated character elements into other restaurants. And from there, just as Eisner had done with characters and film stories, he worked to integrate ESPN into the American parks. An ESPN Zone opened at Downtown Disney in Anaheim. This was a 2-story sports bar and restaurant with nearly 200 screens, entirely focused on football, basketball, and other competitive events. The restaurant also offered video games as well as a sports store. Disney World received the ESPN Club, another sports diner and pub filled with team memorabilia, where the main dining area was arranged as though the tables were set up on a hardwood basketball court. But neither of these locations caught on with people going to Disney parks. A person once described the ESPN Club at Disney World, which was on Crescent Lake just outside of Epcot's International Gateway, as a great place to escape the crowds, as aside from the Super Bowl and the World Series, no one is there. On the surface, the ESPN integration into the park seemed like a reasonable plan. ESPN was a non-Disney, screen-based entertainment platform with a large following, perhaps not that different from Pixar. Putting both properties, Pixar and ESPN, into the resorts would likely make fans feel closer to those things they loved on screen. Disney used its familiar synergy strategies on ESPN at the resorts. For a while, Disney even held food and wine events at the ESPN Club in Florida. But in the end, integration into Disney venues worked very well with Pixar, but not so much with ESPN. And to clarify this, I have this story. In the 1990s, Disney opened a sports complex at the Florida resort, largely a place for amateur and school sports teams to hold competition, a complex initially called Disney's Wide World of Sports. In 2010, Disney rebranded this sports complex as the ESPN Wide World of Sports with various upgrades to competitive areas. But the rebranding, aside from some new equipment, did little to grow the business. That is, the slow lesson for Disney was the ESPN name and properties inside of Disney's various business units didn't connect with its existing customers in the same way as had Pixar and later Lucasfilm and Marvel. In part, I would say that this was Disney not understanding why Disney fans like Disney. Disney parks present an environment focused on collaborative experiences and positive family values. ESPN, on the other hand, presents an environment focused on competition and tense and often adverse positions of rivalry, even among sports fans. As a side note here, one of the things I noticed about the parks this past fall was the relative absence of political shirts and caps, both for Democrats and for Republicans. When I found shirts celebrating political candidates and political slogans in many places outside the parks. That is, for years, Disney has signaled that its parks are places where we celebrate what connects us, not what makes our groups distinct from one another. Fandom inside Disney often focuses on commonality. Fandom inside of ESPN often focuses on competitive rivalries. That is, the overall mood of the two environments, the general Disney parks and the ESPN areas, didn't mix very well. Beyond this, the ESPN restaurants at both resorts, at least to me, never felt particularly special, at least not special enough to be inside of a themed resort. Instead of lifting guests up out of their everyday world, the ESPN restaurants reminded them of the world back home. This was clear from the very start. Shortly after the ESPN Club opened at Disney World, a local reporter noted, "There isn't enough to distinguish ESPN Club from other sports bars, except for its size." I will say that placing the ESPN restaurants inside the American resorts was an interesting experiment to see if the same synergistic strategies could enhance the value of both Disney parks and ESPN by combining them, much as Eisner had done successfully with Pixar. In the end, though, this just didn't work out. And let me add in one more thing about the ESPN Club restaurant at Disney World. Most everything about this restaurant, from its menu to its pricing, should have produced a successful business. Let me talk about this for just a moment because context here will be important later. The ESPN Club was next to Disney's Boardwalk. Though Boardwalk does have hotel rooms, it is primarily a DVC property. In DVC circles, Boardwalk has a unique identity. It is known for being one of the lowest point accommodations on property. That is, the rooms there, when using points, are a good value compared to many other DVC options. Because of this, over many years, the Boardwalk Resort has attracted a value-conscious DVC crowd. The menu pricing of ESPN Club reflected this. A burger with fries just before the ESPN Club closed in 2020 was $16. A grilled chicken sandwich, $15, fish and chips, $17, an entire bowl of chili with cornbread, $10, and a refillable soda, $4. The problem here wasn't the pricing or the menu or the location. It was the lack of connection to resort fans and to other experiences around Disney World. Perhaps this whole plan, integrating ESPN into the Disney parks, was just a bit of wishful thinking in that Eisner, a lifelong sports fan, might be able to work the same magic for his area of fandom as he had for computer animation. The ESPN zone closed at Disney World in 2018. For a while, Disney planned to tear down the building and build a new hotel there, but due to zoning battles with the city, this never came to pass. Presently, the building is open. Its exterior walls mostly hold colorful advertisements for programs on Disney+, some of which, like Luca, premiered on the streamer years ago. In March 2020, the ESPN Club at Disney World closed with the resort for COVID, and then simply never reopened again. Over the years, I had been in the club a handful of times, and can't ever once remember seeing it crowded. It mostly sold modestly priced food, which should have matched well with the middle-class clientele at the Boardwalk Resort, but this simply never gelled. The feel of the ESPN environment, at least as I see it, was simply too far from the environmental feel that most Disney fans expect from the resort and its restaurants. Disney resort restaurants tend to do well if they relate to international or unique foods, the integration of character or movie elements, theming around an exotic location, whether that be a real location or an imagined one, and live entertainment. ESPN Club simply had none of these. When it was announced post-pandemic that the ESPN Club wouldn't reopen, I assumed that something better matched to Disney World, and specifically to the identity of the Boardwalk Resort location would move in, but that's not at all what happened. If the ESPN Club at Disney World was a curious business experiment that never really came together, the venue that took over the club's old space, at least so far, might be more accurately described as a fiasco. The failure of the ESPN Club might be partially the result of Disney not knowing its own fan base or simply wishing that its fan base was more interested in sports than they were. But after ESPN Club left the premises, Disney reached an agreement with an outside company to create a new restaurant there. This was the Cake Bake Shop of Indiana. And in Indiana, the Cake Bake Shop had a grand total of 2 restaurants. If I had to take a guess, I would say that the problems for the Cake Bake Shop, which now wanted to open a 3rd location in the old ESPN Club building, were largely centered on its executives not understanding how Disney World was laid out as a nuanced set of individual districts. From many hundred miles away, I think it might be easy to see Disney World as a homogeneous resort, as opposed to what it really is, a discrete set of neighborhoods, each with its own unique culture and fan identities. There is a large difference, I would say, between Pop Century and the Animal Kingdom Lodge, or more pointedly between the Boardwalk area and the Grand Floridian. From Indiana, perhaps, Disney World might look like 43 square miles of the same thing. But for regular visitors, these areas mean different things to those who go there, including pricing and cost breakdowns both for hotels and restaurants. I know I mentioned the financial identity of the Boardwalk area in the last section, but let me break it down here into specifics a little more. Boardwalk does have rooms for cash hotel guests, but the majority of the rooms at Boardwalk are DVC offerings. In terms of points in the DVC community, Boardwalk is known as one of the DVC resorts with the least expensive rooms in terms of points. In January, for example, a standard view studio room cost 9 points on a weeknight. Over at the Grand Floridian, a standard view studio cost 17 points, or nearly double. That is, Boardwalk is one of the DVC resorts that plays to value-conscious members, typically middle-class families. And this point pricing situation is something that can't easily change. Disney can easily raise the cash price at any hotel it wants to, but DVC areas, due to contract restrictions, can't easily raise point costs. When a DVC resort opens, it's arranged into a condo association with a set number of points that cover a set number of rooms over the course of a year. And DVC is bound to the arrangement until that lease expires, typically after 50 years of use. So DVC could raise the cost of a standard view studio from 9 points to, let's say, 10 points. But to do this, they would then need to remove the same number of points from something else, such as by reducing the point cost on a one-bedroom villa from 19 points down to 18 points. That is, the points at the end of the year for each DVC resort always need to total out to the same number. There's no practical way to make a 9-point studio room now cost 17 points, as simply the condo association agreement wouldn't easily allow this, unless a similar number of points were removed from the cost of other rooms. That is, the Boardwalk has always been seen as a good value in terms of points, and there's no easy way to change this until the condo association expires in the early 2040s. Or to put this bluntly, for the next couple of decades, this area is always going to be seen as a value-conscious portion of the Disney resort. The ESPN Club, at least in terms of menu pricing, was positioned to play well into this value-conscious audience. But the financial identity of this neighborhood at Disney World would be the specific underlying problem for the restaurant that took over the ESPN Club space, not understanding the specific region where they were setting up shop. For decades, Disney World has had many third-party restaurants on property. The Patina Group owns many restaurants, including Via Napoli and the Italy Pavilion. Landry owns a number, including Yak and Yeti over at Animal Kingdom. Mitsukoshi Limited owns and operates the restaurants in the Japan Pavilion, including Teppanydo. The Palmas Group owns and operates the restaurants in the Mexico Pavilion, as well as a half dozen over at Coronado Springs and one at Disney Springs. In fact, the vast majority of restaurants at Disney Springs are owned and operated by outside companies, with just a few exceptions, such as Amorette's, Hangar Bar, and Deluxe Burger, which are operated by Disney. In the last few years, Disney World has tended to partner with micro or regional chains that have proven themselves successful elsewhere. Among the mix here are Haleo and Summer House at Disney Springs, both of which had a few restaurants far from Orlando, and then opened a new location at Disney World. I would say that some of these outside restaurants succeed at Disney World better than others. Haleo is fabulous and picks up on the international cuisine impulses that move through the resort, but aside from its bakery, which is very good, Summer House is mediocre and doesn't lean into anything such as unique cuisine, deep theming, or live entertainment that would better place it alongside the resort's other offerings. But no restaurant at Disney World has had a stranger, or to be blunt, worse opening than the Cake Bake Shop over on Crescent Lake just outside of Epcot. Cake Bake Shop is a micro chain in Indiana with, as I mentioned, 2 previous locations. In Indiana, it's an upper-end dining experience. It also has a high-priced to-go bakery. In Indiana, at the Cake Bake Shop, the Millionaire Cake is $16 per slice. Earl's Court Chocolate Cake is $17 per slice. Admittedly, these are extremely high prices for a single piece of cake. But keep those numbers in your head for a moment because it's going to get worse. Everything about the 2 existing locations in Indiana, from their interior decorating scheme of white, pink, and gold, to their offerings of champagne and 5 varieties of mimosas, from their menu focused on French sandwiches and quiche, to the weekend opening time of 10 a.m., presents the chain largely as a brunch establishment, perfect for bridal parties and baby showers. And many of these same cues were absorbed into the newly opened restaurant that's just outside Epcot's International Gateway. When designs were first posted for this restaurant back in 2022, it looked like a restaurant that, in terms of its visual presentation, with lots and lots of flowing tablecloths, lace, high crystal chandeliers, and heaps of fresh flowers, would have better fit in between the Grand Floridian and the Wedding Pavilion than over at the Boardwalk, which celebrates turn-of-the-century amusement parks. Not far from the Cake Bake Shop, the Boardwalk area just opened a specialty corn dog booth, which has been popular and fits the area theming very well, with specialty corn dogs between $10 and $15, including a bag of chips. This pricing structure, though maybe a little high, mostly matches the price expectations of those who stay at the Boardwalk Resort. But let's say that, even though the Boardwalk area is a lightly themed part of the Disney Resort, the cake bake design strategy is out of step with the overall area, with its high chandeliers and thick tablecloths. But really, this is just one of the minor problems here. Beyond this clearly are more serious missteps, which all indicate that cake bake executives didn't understand how the Disney World neighborhoods really worked, or if they did, they were likely hoping to change existing tourist patterns. ESPN was never particularly busy. Part of this was the lack of brand cohesion between ESPN and Disney, but part of this was simply foot traffic patterns on this side of Crescent Lake. A large number of people pass by this exact location each morning on their way to Epcot, and then crowds come back at night. The restaurants in this area along Crescent Lake are mostly empty during the middle of the day because resort guests typically don't leave Epcot to find better food outside the park. Guests will leave the Magic Kingdom to find better food. I suspect that Kona's, Whispering Canyon Cafe, Geyser Point, Steakhouse 71, and even Gasparilla Island Grill all pick up a number of guests because the Magic Kingdom doesn't have a lot of highly desirable dining locations. But the food over at Epcot is quite good, with some places being exceptional. So here's the first bit of really poor planning. The Cake Bake Shop deeply wants to present itself as a brunch location that is middle-of-the-day dining. And at Disney World, the Cake Bake Shop has leaned into this brunch identity by adding even more brunch selections to its menu, including Eggs Benedict with crab cakes, chocolate Belgian waffles, orange French toast, along with the usual quiche, sandwiches, salads, champagnes, and mimosas. This creates a breakfast lunch menu that is targeting the 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. crowd, But anyone who's spent a few days over at Boardwalk knows that the crowd's here. They may buy breakfast, a quick meal, and then head into the parks, but they aren't there for a long meal. Also, some people have a late dinner here. But almost no one drives in midday to have a meal there, and most of the people who are staying at that resort are in the parks midday. So with this, we're moving into a very strange world in which a brunch-focused restaurant is being added to part of the property which has almost no foot traffic during brunch hours. In my opinion, what would have done well in this space is a restaurant with grab-and-go options for breakfast. Perhaps some modestly priced egg sandwiches, specialty bagels and spreads, oatmeal with interesting toppings, and maybe some egg bowls for the low-carb crowd. Add in some specialty coffee drinks that aren't completely machine-made, and I think this would have been a winner. The restaurant location is between the hotel and the International Gateway entrance to Epcot, so people on their way to the park will get something to take with them. But not a lot of these people are going to be dropping in for what is described as a 2-hour dining experience consisting of Eggs Benedict and a mimosa before hitting up Spaceship Earth and Cosmic Rewind. Essentially, the function here needs to match how most people use the facility. And then in the evening, this same restaurant could have possibly expanded out the traditional evening fare at Crescent Lake. On Crescent Lake, within walking distance, there's an Italian restaurant, a very good fish restaurant, a seafood buffet, an excellent steakhouse, a burger and ice cream shop, and a restaurant that I would describe as a very good upscale mixed cuisine diner. So this leaves a lot of openings for restaurant types that might appeal to guests coming back from the parks, essentially people who want to relax after spending 10 or 12 hours in Epcot. Off the top of my head, reasonable options here include Asian food, Indian, Mexican, Mediterranean, and barbecue. I can see any of these options doing better dinner business than Cake Bake, which at 8 p.m. at night is still offering entrees such as quiche and chicken salad croissant that I would largely describe as brunch food. The next misstep has to do with a very deep remodel and an opening timeline. The restaurant was announced in March 2022 with an opening date of 2023. Cake Bake at this time was a micro chain with 2 locations in Indiana and a mail-order business. That is, it likely didn't have very deep pockets. This micro chain now needed to support the redesign of a reasonably large restaurant space in Florida, which from a financial standpoint seemed mostly manageable, I would assume, so long as this restaurant opened on time, ideally early in 2023, to start producing revenue. But Cake Bake missed 2023 entirely, and it didn't open early in 2024 either. It opened toward the end of the year, well into its 4th quarter. And here I will speculate that 2.5 years of refurbing on Disney property for an Indiana microchain likely stacked up a lot of debt. And this leads to the next misstep, and this was the biggie: the reveal of the menu and the prices. Again, at least as I'm looking at it, the money for that 2.5-year refurb needed to be recouped somewhere, or more pointedly, it needed to come from its future customers. On October 5th of this year, about 3 weeks ahead of the long-delayed opening, the Cake Bake Shop posted its menu along with prices, and some of those initial prices were simply jaw-dropping. This is for a takeaway bakery and a standard table service restaurant that is not categorized as a signature offering like Gico, Topolino's, Citricos, Tiffin's, and so on. The first set of prices is from the sit-down restaurant's menu. Egg sandwich, $23. Slice of broccoli quiche, $28. side of truffle fries, $18, club sandwich, $34, classic burger, $32, and an $18 peanut butter and jelly sandwich, which was on the kids' menu. And just so you know, none of this pricing seems to be related to expensive or rare ingredients. On the soft drink menu, a Diet Coke was $8, about double the cost of a Diet Coke most anywhere else on property. The next set of prices is from the initial menu for the takeaway bakery. A croissant, $12, a lemon bar, $16, and a single slice of cake ranged from $22 to $26. That piece of chocolate cake that was and still is $17 at their Indiana locations was listed as $26 at Disney, a whopping 53% upcharge from something that was already extremely expensive. Or to put it this way, with sales tax, it would cost a family of four $111 to buy 4 slices of chocolate cake, which comes in a to-go box, to be eaten outside on public tables along Crescent Lake. To be fair, each slice of cake is larger than what one person would likely eat. There was an interesting moment online in early October after these prices were posted. The restaurant put up a photo menu on a reader board outside of its entrance. People posted photos of this menu online, and some people on various boards and on social media sites thought the prices listed were for a full cake. After all, how can a to-go bakery charge $26 for a single slice of cake, especially when, over at Disney Springs at Gideon's Bakehouse, typically seen as the premium bakery on property, enormous slices of cake sold for $9. But once the minor misunderstanding was cleared up that the cake bake shop was actually charging $26 for a single piece of chocolate cake, support for this restaurant started to quickly fall apart. The outcry from the internet was fast and devastating, with a stream of online Disney World fans vocally swearing off the cake bake shop even before it opened. Various posts said, "Absolutely ridiculous." Another said, "They are insane." And another, "Total rip-off prices." And another, "This is bad even for Disney prices." And so on, up and down discussion boards, Facebook, Twitter, and elsewhere, which created a situation in which the first thing the average Disney fan knew about the cake bake shop was that its pricing was wildly high. This problem, particularly in Disney circles, quickly went viral. So in this you have an extremely unusual situation, in which the intended audience, which are Disney World fans, were now protesting a restaurant directed at them before that restaurant could even open. The level of vitriol was so high that it produced something that I've never before seen. Cake Bake Shop created a revised menu even before the restaurant opened, in which some and only some of the prices were lowered as a way to hopefully manage the growing situation. Some of the price changes were essentially meaningless. Cinnamon Toast Bites went from $24 to $23.99, which set off another round of comic online ridicule. But other price changes were modest improvements. The egg sandwich went from $23 to $19.99, which is still pretty terrible, but at least it's $3 less terrible. The $28 slice of quiche went to $23.99. Crab cakes went from $52 to $49.99. That $18 peanut butter and jelly sandwich on the kids' menu went from $18 to $12.99. But then, as though managers simply couldn't help themselves, some other prices actually went up. The shrimp remoulade jumped from $26 up to $28.99. The cake slices remained roughly within the same price range, but the 4 lowest price cake slices actually went up by $1. The chocolate cake went down by $1 from $26 to $24.99. For the most part, though, the price changes were minimal. The only price that I would say had a significant change was that butter croissant, which went from $12 down to $5.99, but this was an anomaly, and $5.99 is still a lot for a croissant. And here is where understanding Disney World's neighborhoods matter. Maybe the high pricing wouldn't have been as deeply rejected if the cake bake shop was in a more expensive neighborhood, such as by the Grand Floridian. But in its current location, the cake bake shop has a very unusual pairing. It is one of the most expensive non-signature restaurants on property, next to a DVC resort that specifically targets value-conscious visitors. To put it bluntly, the families who are attracted to the 9-point-a-night studios probably aren't going to be drawn to $25 slices of chocolate cake. These things simply don't go together well. Yet these two business offerings are now side by side. It's almost as though the cake bake management did absolutely no research on how various resort areas identify themselves within the Disney World ecosystem. And then, as if this all weren't bad enough, one more thing happened. As though its managers were again unable to read the room in any way whatsoever, a few days after the cake bake shop opened, in its checkout system, they started to add an automatic 20% gratuity to every single order. To be clear, this is both for the restaurant, where there's a waitstaff to serve you, and for the counter service to-go bakery, where you receive your food in a bag and eat it outdoors at public tables. This means that $25 slice of cake with the automatic gratuity and tax now comes to over $31. For a family of 4, that's a $125 dessert or snack. To be clear, I haven't tried the cake. The cake bake shop opened a couple of days after my last visit to the Florida resort. But this weekend, I'm staying within walking distance of the cake bake shop. I will definitely go over there, but I'm not sure I'm going to get anything. In the past, I have purchased some crazy meals and experiences to understand what the American resorts offer. But each time beforehand, I could see some small potential value in those items, even if they were highly priced. Every well-run business absolutely deserves to make a profit. I deeply support that. But it shouldn't be so high that customers feel they're being taken advantage of, or that the high profit is necessary now to compensate for poor business decisions made by the business itself, which is my gut feeling here. Instead of writing an actual review of Cake Bake, I'll probably just wander over to Ale & Compass, which is in the Yacht Club and is one of the hidden jewels at the resort. You can get an entire meal there for the cost of one piece of chocolate cake on the other side of Crescent Lake. I do think, though, that the Cake Bake Shop is an outlier at the resort, and also one that pretty clearly has been mismanaged before opening, hence the delayed timeline, the need to create an off-site bakery, and the revised menu. And so, at least for now, instead of talking about the Cake Bake Shop's food, I'd like to take a minute to point out a place that I feel is a truly good value in the Crescent Lake neighborhood. As I mentioned, very few guests leave Epcot to find food elsewhere, but if you ever do, or if you just need a break from the park, one of the quiet, modestly priced treasures in this part of Disney World is Ale & Compass. It's also one of the few Disney restaurants to have discrete breakfast, lunch, and dinner menus. And I will point out that, in my opinion, the breakfast and dinner offerings tend to be better than lunch. Lunch seems largely designed as middle-of-the-road, quickly served fare for people using the large convention space at the back of Beach and Yacht Club. But for breakfast, the shrimp and grits are fabulous. And for dinner, a shout-out to a couple of things: the brick lemon herb chicken and also the seafood pot pie. Most of these entrees here cost less than a single piece of cake across the way. But to close up now, maybe there are a few takeaways from today's episode. Things that might have made my old general education business professor from decades ago a little bit happy. And they are these. First, if you're going to open a third-party restaurant at Disney World, ask yourself, how well does the identity of your restaurant match the interest of Disney park fans? Second, Disney table service restaurants specialize in character experiences, international cuisine, unique food offerings, film and location-based theming, and live entertainment. If you don't have at least one of those, you're probably going to have some stiff competition for customers. And lastly, know the neighborhoods at the resort. Disney World is not just all 43 square miles of one thing. If you're going to open a high-cost restaurant, which in itself is a huge risk, don't set it next to a DVC resort focused on value-conscious visitors. But it will be interesting now to see how Cake Bake fares moving forward, and if there's anything, such as deep pricing or menu changes, that might actually turn this business around after a very troubling opening. And that's where I think we are with this outlier restaurant that is just outside Epcot. I'll be back next week with a new episode. The plan right now is to catch up a little more with contemporary news stories before we dip back down into the life and art of Mary Blair. Lastly, as you know, we're an ad-free, listener-supported podcast. We do just two things: deep dives on stories related to the history of the Disney studio and the parks, and news and analysis of current events as they relate to the Disney company. We are funded entirely by listener contributions, specifically by listeners who join us over on Bandcamp as monthly subscribers. On Bandcamp, you will find over 300 episodes not available on iTunes or anywhere else. But the best reason to join us there is to support the work we do here and to make sure that this podcast continues to exist. You can support us by becoming a monthly subscriber at dhipodcast.bandcamp.com. I'll also leave a link down in our show notes. So, until next Sunday, this is Todd James Pierce.